Saigon, April 1975. You have 48 hours to escape. Your bank account is useless. Your house is unsellable. Your business still exists on paper, but nobody wants to buy it. The smugglers at the docks refuse your currency. The officials at the checkpoints are no longer interested in promises. And the only thing standing between your family and entrapment is a small object hidden inside your clothes. The city is still technically functioning. The banks are open. The currency still exists. Government offices still stamp papers. Shops still accept payment. Radios still speak in the language of order. But everyone can feel the collapse moving faster than the official announcements. Outside the American embassy, the lines are already stretching around the block. Families are carrying small suitcases, sacks of rice, photographs, and children. At the docks, men who spent their entire lives building businesses are now standing shoulder to shoulder with factory workers, civil servants, widows, and black market traders, all trying to buy a place on overcrowded fishing boats. Nobody knows exactly how many hours remain. You arrive carrying what should have been enough wealth to survive. You have cash. You have bank deposits. Maybe you even have documents proving ownership of land or a business. None of it matters. The smugglers are not accepting bank transfers. They are not waiting for wire confirmations. They are not interested in title deeds, account balances, or promises that your family can pay later. They want payment immediately. In a collapsing system, trust disappears first. And when trust disappears, wealth becomes physical again. This is where millions of Vietnamese families discovered a brutal reality that repeats throughout history. There is a difference between being rich and being mobile. A man with property, bank deposits, and a successful business could suddenly become poorer than a widow carrying a small fabric packet sewn into the lining of her clothes, because inside that packet were thin leaves of high-purity gold, not large bullion bars, not heavy coins, not jewelry that would attract attention. Small, divisible, paper-thin pieces of nearly pure gold known in Vietnam as Kim Thon leaves. Most importantly, they could move. Most people assume that if they ever needed to leave quickly, their savings would come with them. They imagine they would simply withdraw cash, wire funds internationally, access online banking from abroad, or liquidate assets after arriving somewhere safer. That assumption only works inside a functioning system. The moment institutions become unstable, every layer of modern wealth begins failing in sequence. First come withdrawal limits. Banks shorten operating hours. ATMs empty. Capital controls appear. Wire transfers slow down. Currency exchange windows close. Governments announce temporary restrictions that somehow never seem temporary. Then comes the deeper problem. Even if your account still technically exists, you may no longer be able to convert it into usable value fast enough. A six-figure balance on a banking app is meaningless if you cannot access cash, cross a border with it, or convince anyone to trust the institution holding it. This is why large bullion was often less useful than people imagine. A 1-ounce gold bar is excellent for preserving wealth over long periods. It is far less useful in a bribery economy. If a border guard wants the equivalent of $300 to let your family through a checkpoint, what happens if all you have is a 1-ounce bar worth several $1,000s? You are not getting change. And once you reveal that you are carrying large visible bullion, you have created a second problem. You have told everyone around you that you possess more wealth than they expected. In collapse environments, visibility becomes a liability. The same problem applies to property. A house cannot cross a border. A business cannot fit into a backpack. A safe full of silver cannot move quickly through an airport, train station, military checkpoint, or refugee corridor. People often confuse net worth with survivable wealth. They are not the same thing. Survivable wealth must meet a very different standard. It must be small enough to conceal, divisible enough to transact with, durable enough to survive travel, recognizable enough to avoid long negotiations, and valuable enough to restart life somewhere else. That is why during the final years of South Vietnam, many families quietly converted portions of their savings into tails, thin gold, leaves, small chains, or tiny pieces of nearly pure gold jewelry that could be broken apart and traded in stages. They understood something that modern investors often ignore. The purpose of an emergency asset is not maximum return. The purpose is optionality. When a financial system is functioning, efficiency matters. When a financial system breaks, flexibility matters more. And the people who survive institutional collapse are usually not the ones with the largest balance sheets. They are the ones whose wealth can still function after the paperwork, the banks, and the official promises stop functioning. By the final weeks of April 1975, South Vietnam was not collapsing evenly. That is one of the most important patterns to understand. In every institutional breakdown, different systems fail at different speeds. The government may still issue statements, Banks may still open their doors, currency may still circulate, but the invisible architecture underneath daily life begins to fracture long before the formal collapse arrives. Merchants start refusing certain notes, people hoard fuel, employers delay wages, police disappear from some districts and become predatory in others. Transportation networks become unreliable. Rumors begin moving faster than official information. Entire neighborhoods shift from normal commerce to panic buying in a matter of hours. By the time helicopters were lifting people from rooftops in Saigon, the real economy had already changed. Official money still existed, but practical money had changed form. The men controlling the boats, the truck routes, the checkpoints, the river crossings, and the forged documents no longer trusted paper currency because they did not trust the government standing behind it. That is the key mechanism. Currencies do not fail because paper suddenly becomes physically useless. They fail because the social agreement around them breaks. A banknote is only valuable because everyone believes someone else will accept it tomorrow. Once that belief weakens, people begin searching for harder forms of value. Food, fuel, medicine, foreign currency, cigarettes, alcohol, precious metals. Whatever is trusted becomes money. Whatever is doubted stops being money. This same pattern has repeated across Argentina, Lebanon, Venezuela, the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, and Zimbabwe. The details change. The mechanism does not. During the early stages, people still believe the disruption is temporary. They wait for the banks to reopen. They assume restrictions will be lifted. They believe the government will stabilize the currency, guarantee deposits, or restore normal payment systems. Usually, that hope lasts longer than it should. Then comes the moment when people realize they are no longer trying to preserve their purchasing power. They are trying to preserve their mobility. That is a different problem entirely. At that point, the question is no longer, how much are you worth? The question becomes, what can you carry through a checkpoint? A family with 2 apartments, retirement accounts, and large bank balances may discover that almost none of their wealth is portable under stress. Meanwhile, someone with a modest reserve of small gold pieces, foreign cash, and a prearranged contact network may suddenly possess something far more valuable: the ability to act. That is why corrupt border systems almost always converge on the same payment logic. They do not want visible assets that can be traced. They do not want promises. They want something that fits into a pocket, survives water, survives searches, survives inflation, survives jurisdictional changes, and can be exchanged again immediately after the transaction. In theory, wealth is an accounting concept. In practice, during collapse, wealth becomes whatever buys movement. The uncomfortable part is that this is not just a story about Vietnam. The mechanism keeps returning because the structure of modern wealth keeps becoming more centralized, more digital, and more permission-based. In early 2022, millions of Ukrainians suddenly faced the same problem in a different form. The banking system did not disappear entirely, but people trying to flee still encountered ATM shortages, long lines, withdrawal caps, transport disruptions, closed branches, damaged infrastructure, and practical limits on moving large sums quickly. Men of military age often could not leave at all. Families were split apart. Women crossing into Poland, Romania, and Moldova had to carry enough usable wealth to secure transport, temporary housing, food, medicine, and legal documents in unfamiliar places. Foreign cards sometimes worked. Sometimes they did not. Wire transfers sometimes arrived. Sometimes they did not. Digital systems remained partially functional, but only where electricity, telecommunications, identity verification, and institutional trust remained intact. That distinction matters. People often speak about digital assets as if they exist outside political systems. Most do not. Your bank account depends on banks. Your brokerage account depends on custodians. Your payment apps depend on telecommunications, electricity, identity systems, and governments allowing those systems to function. Even cryptocurrency, which is often marketed as portable freedom, has severe limitations under real-world escape conditions. You still need internet access. You still need a functioning phone or laptop. You still need battery power. You still need password access, device security, and an exchange or counterparty willing to convert the asset into local spending power. In practice, very few refugees escaped using cryptocurrency alone. There were isolated cases of people carrying wealth through seed phrases, hardware wallets, or memorized credentials. But those examples were rare precisely because they required technical sophistication, planning, and stable access to functioning infrastructure. Most people under acute stress do not have perfect operational security. They forget passwords. They lose devices. They expose themselves during searches. They discover that the country they arrived in has no easy off-ramp from digital assets into rent, transportation, or groceries. This does not mean digital assets are useless. It means they solve a different problem. Digital assets can help move wealth across jurisdictions after arrival. They are much less reliable for crossing the border itself. That is the crucial distinction. Border flight is an analog problem. It is physical. It is immediate. It is emotional. It happens under sleep deprivation, fear, time pressure, language barriers, corruption, checkpoints, and incomplete information. In those conditions, the most useful forms of wealth are usually the simplest. A few $1,000s in small foreign notes, a concealed reserve of fractional gold, copies of identity documents, emergency medicine, a second phone, a trusted contact waiting on the other side. The people who adapt fastest are rarely the people with the most sophisticated financial strategies. They are the ones who understand that under stress, complexity becomes fragility. The Vietnamese families who escaped successfully in 1975 did not survive because they were wealthier than everyone else. Many were not. They survived because they understood the difference between stored wealth and deployable wealth. The most effective escape assets shared the same characteristics. They were small. They were divisible. They were recognizable. They were hard to confiscate quickly. And they could be exchanged without requiring a functioning institution. Kim Than Leaves met all of those conditions. So did tiny chains, small rings, broken pieces of high-purity jewelry, and fractional tails hidden across multiple parts of the body. The distribution mattered almost as much as the asset itself. People who concentrated everything in one bag, one pocket, or one visible container often lost everything in a single search. People who spread value across hems, belts, shoe inserts, children's clothing, toiletry bags, and luggage linings had a better chance of retaining at least part of their wealth even if they were partially searched or robbed. That is still the practical lesson today. If someone wants a collapse-resistant reserve, the most useful physical forms are rarely large bars. They are usually fractional pieces in the 1 gram to 5 gram range. Small sovereign coins, narrow chains, or high-purity jewelry that does not immediately appear expensive. A single large bar concentrates too much value in one visible object. Fractional pieces create flexibility. They allow staged spending. They reduce overpayment risk. They make bribery, transport, lodging, food, and emergency medical purchases easier to manage. They also reduce the danger of revealing the full scale of your reserves. Because the moment someone realizes you are carrying significant portable wealth, your risk changes immediately. You stop being a refugee. You become a target. That does not mean hiding everything illegally or refusing disclosure when disclosure is required. Different countries have different reporting thresholds for cash, precious metals, and monetary instruments. Ignoring those rules can create its own problems. The point is not secrecy for its own sake. The point is resilience. A practical emergency reserve should be legal, portable, divisible, and boring enough not to attract unnecessary attention. And it should never exist as your only form of wealth. This is not an argument to abandon bank accounts, brokerage accounts, businesses, or property. It is an argument to recognize their limitations. Large assets are excellent for building wealth during stable periods. Small portable assets are excellent for preserving options when stability disappears. The biggest financial mistake people make during stable periods is assuming stability is permanent. They build wealth for efficiency instead of survivability. They optimize for tax treatment, yield, leverage, account size, real estate appreciation, and digital convenience. Then one day, they discover that their wealth is trapped inside systems they no longer control. The lesson from Saigon is not that gold is magical. It is that mobility has value. A family escaping Vietnam in 1975 did not need an ideal portfolio. They needed enough portable value to buy a boat ride, bribe a guard, rent a room, purchase food, replace documents, and survive the first few months somewhere unfamiliar. That is a much smaller requirement than most people imagine, but it has to exist before the emergency begins, because once everyone else is trying to solve the same problem, it is usually too late. Banks close, borders tighten, airports become crowded, governments impose controls. People discover that the assets they spent decades accumulating are suddenly too large, too visible, too illiquid, or too dependent on permission. The forensic record is clear. The first people trapped in a collapsing system are usually not the poorest. They are often the people with the highest percentage of their wealth tied to institutions, property, paperwork, and assumptions. The people who move first are usually the ones with modest reserves of portable value, flexible plans, multiple jurisdictions, and a willingness to act before the official narrative catches up with reality. That does not require paranoia. It requires honesty. You do not need to believe collapse is inevitable. You only need to recognize that every system eventually reaches moments where mobility matters more than nominal wealth. When that moment comes, the relevant question will not be how much money you had on paper. It will be how much of it could move with you. And that leaves you with a simple choice. Build a life where all of your wealth depends on the system continuing to function exactly as promised, or keep a portion of your wealth in forms that can survive the day it does not.